Good morning, everyone. I do take a bit of exception to what Pastor Peter said with regard to me teaching about the parable. Because as Scott said last week, and as we'll get to in the presentation today, the parables are meant to be discussed and worked through. And so I'm not going to be teaching as much as helping to facilitate.
I have to go then.
Our reflection. Well, if you could do it with Scott, I could do it with you, right? Let's begin, however, by just reflecting on a parable that comes earlier in chapter 13 of Matthew that was not included in the lectionary reading last week. And just use that as our prayer or reflection. So he told them many things in parables, saying, listen, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell on the path, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground, where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no roots, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Let anyone with ears listen. I'm going to start with a little video created by the Bible Project, and it looks at. Just a second, I'm gonna hope you know. Okay.
Jesus of Nazareth was a master teacher, and some of his most well-known teachings are told in short stories called parables.
Yeah, like the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant who was looking for pearls. And when he found the ultimate pearl, he sold everything so that he could buy it.
It must have been so pretty amazing pearl.
Or the kingdom of God is like a tiny mustard seed that a farmer planted in his garden. It grew and became a huge tree, and birds came to perch in its branches.
And that's a beautiful image, but what does it mean?
Exactly. Jesus didn't tell parables to make everything clear. Rather, he wanted to provoke the imagination and invite people to see what God is doing in the world from a new perspective.
So let's talk about how to read the parables of Jesus. Now, there's many great teachers that throughout history have used stories to teach students about morality, religion, philosophy.
But Jesus didn't use his parables to teach abstract religious or moral ideals. He said that his parables were about himself and his mission.
His mission, which was to announce that the kingdom of God was arriving on earth as it is in heaven.
Right. So in Jesus' day, the Israelites were ruled by the Roman Empire. But their scriptures promised that one day their God would come to rule his people as king. And so many Israelites wanted to revolt against Rome and fight for their freedom.
And this is what some people thought of as the kingdom of God.
Exactly. But Jesus was a poor traveling prophet, healing the sick, inviting people to follow him. And he said that this is the arrival of God's kingdom.
And that didn't fit people's expectations.
Right. And so Jesus used some parables to help people imagine that his small movement was the arrival of God's kingdom.
Oh yeah, like the parable, the kingdom of God is yeast hidden in a lump of dough. You might not see its influence, but it's gonna change everything.
Jesus also told parables about the upside down values of God's kingdom, about how the least important people in the world are actually the most important people to God, especially those who are poor and of low status.
Yeah, like the parable about the business owner who hired workers throughout the day. in the morning, later in the day, and even towards the end of the day. And when it was time to pay everyone, he paid them all the same wage.
Right, Jesus is showing how money and status are irrelevant to God, who offers his generous mercy to everybody.
Now, not all of the parables have happy endings. Some are really tense.
Yes, Jesus stood in the tradition of Israel's prophets, who also told parables to criticize Israel's leaders because they mistook their kingdom for God's. So Jesus warned the leaders of his day. If they don't accept his offer of God's kingdom, they're headed for destruction.
Yeah, like the parable of the landowner who built a wonderful vineyard and he expects it to produce fruit.
Yes, Jesus gets this parable from the prophet Isaiah, but then he adapts it.
Right. So the landowner appoints managers to take care of this vineyard. And at harvest, he sends servants to collect the fruit. But those managers kill the servants.
So the landowner sends his own son to confront the managers, and they kill him too. And so Jesus asks the people around him, what do you all think this landowner should do?
Oh, he's gonna punish those managers and hire new ones.
Jesus knew that if Israel kept on their current path, they would be destroyed by God. And so in parables like this, he's forcing people to make a decision about his offer of God's kingdom. Are people going to reject him, ignore him, or trust and follow him?
Now, if this message of God's kingdom is so important, why cloak it in parables? Why not be more clear?
Well, through riddles and parables, Jesus could make really bold claims that revealed truth to people who were open-minded.
For those who have ears to hear, they can ponder it and go deep.
But the parables would also conceal his message from those who were against him, so that he could buy more time.
By time, or what?
Well, Jesus was preparing his closest followers for the greatest surprise yet. Jesus claimed that Israel's God was coming to rule over his people not through coercion or violent force, but through self-giving love, as he was going to die for their sins.
But his death wasn't the end.
Right. He said that his death would be like a tiny seed buried in the ground, but then it would grow and produce a crop with many seeds.
So these parables, they explain who Jesus was and what he was up to.
And the gospel authors have preserved these parables so that now every generation of Jesus' followers can read and ponder them.
And imagine how God's kingdom is still at work even today.
Right. These ancient parables are still full of new surprises and challenges. They're like a storehouse packed with treasures, some that are new, some that are old, and it's all just waiting to be discovered.
In reviewing Matthew to the point where we're at in Matthew 13, as of last week, there are three keys to understanding Matthew. In the first three chapters, three great themes are introduced. Jesus is in the line of David, the Messiah, and that line is traced genealogically back to Abraham. Jesus is an authoritative teacher, and even supersedes Moses, is the new Moses. And third, Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us. And so as such, Jesus is a sign of God's kingdom, or the kingdom of heaven among us. After the introduction of these themes in Matthew 1 through 3, there are 5 sections, and that keeps with the whole idea of the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, which were considered the books of Moses. And each section then in Matthew has certain elements to it of the experiences of Jesus, and then it concludes with a fairly extensive teaching narrative that kind of addresses what has come right before. So the first of these 5 sections is chapter 4 through 7. It concludes with the Sermon on the Mount. And it shows Jesus as the authoritative Moses figure teaching from the mountain as Moses delivered the law from Mount Sinai. Chapter 8 through 10 concludes with the commissioning of the 12 and sending them out in a mission. And the teaching tells them what to expect. They'll be rejected or they'll be accepted. Chapters 11 through 13 is the section that has these parables in it that we're looking at today. And 11 through 13 introduces different responses to Jesus. The people in general respond in a positive way to Jesus. There are those who are uncertain, and where there's ambiguity, they don't know what to think of Jesus. John the Baptist is one, where he says, are you the Messiah, or are we going to wait for another? And so there's this whole interchange. Jesus' family is another example of that uncertainty, where they're trying to stop him in some ways because he's being accused of being crazy. But also they know, being close to him, that there's something about him. And then the third group, of course, are those who reject. And those who reject were primarily the religious leaders. And this section concludes with chapter 13 and is a teaching by parable. So we come to this one. This parable is in chapter 13, and it's written on your sheet, as well as being described here. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to someone who sowed good seed in his field. While everyone was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and then went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared as well. The slaves of the householder came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from? He answered, an enemy has done this. The slaves said to him, then do you want us to go and gather them? But he replied, no, for in gathering the weeds, you would uproot the wheat along with them. Let both of them grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time, I will tell the reapers, collect the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn. Scott shared this picture last week as part of the sermon, the comparison of wheat and the bearded darnel, which was the weed that would have been referenced in that parable, and how similar they looked, and the danger then that would transpire. I'd invite you to kind of gather within your group, gather as a group, and look at that parable, and it's written on the sheets that you've got. What does this parable say to those who reject Jesus, to those who are unsure about Jesus, and to those who welcome Jesus? The three basic responses that have been covered in chapter 11 through 13. And then what can we understand about God with us, Emmanuel, in this parable, or the kingdom of heaven among us? And then what kingdom characteristics do you think this parable values? So please, I'm going to form a group, because the whole purpose of the parables is to stimulate our own reaction.
Thanks for turning. Sit here so you're close. I don't know. You sit there. You sit there. Sit there. Very unusual. And none under 70, I don't think. Well, I don't know how much. I'm 70. So what does the pair? Yeah, I'm sure. They get burned.
Yes.
It says. That's bad. Questioning or trusting our household. But they're not.
When the weeds and the wheat are both right, then harvest. We need to take them. How do you do that?
I trusted that he planted tall barley. I trusted that he planted all wheat.
How about those who are? The agnostics.
We are not supposed to do that.
Knowing which.
You know, now I understand. I read that. So I think that we're probably what kingdom characteristics. So that was, and then. Really not on here. And okay, so we're supposed to be looking up there. Okay, what do we understand about Emmanuel? Yeah, okay, now I get it. All right, so, what do we understand about it?
He's going so well, I think he's about to think we were-
Ah, okay.
So,
Like your point out.
any really outstanding or exceptionally interesting thoughts that came up in any normal thoughts? Now you're in my
Oh, wow.
I heard one from this group up here that I find really helpful. And it's dangerous to see things entirely through our own lens. But as a Lutheran, the saint and sinner this idea speaks to me very much in this parable. That the weeds and the wheat grow up together in me. Not just this separation of somebody's all weed and somebody's all wheat. But seeing the weed and wheat growing up together. I use this parable, in fact, for a funeral sermon. For someone very talented, use gifts of music, but had a challenge with alcoholism and dependency, and how the weeds and the wheat kind of work together, and kind of holding forth the idea that at the time of death, perhaps the weeds were going to be extracted, and the fullness of that person's gifts and talents would be actualized in God's kingdom. But I think that's certainly a piece. Let's
I knew that would happen to you. That's because I'm sitting close enough to the technology to screw it all up.
if someone can find Peter to get that started again, that would be great. The Gospel of Matthew actually gives us a description of this parable. And I'll read that. He left the crowds and went into the house, and his disciples approached him, saying, "Explain to us the parable of the weeds of the field." He answered, "The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world." The remote doesn't advance it anymore. "The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed are the children of the kingdom. The weeds are the children of the evil one. And the enemy who sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. Just as the weeds are collected and burned up with fire, so will it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send his angels, and they will collect out of his kingdom all causes of sin and evildoers. They will throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Let anyone with ears listen."
Speaking for the weeds, I don't like that parable much.
I agree. And remember that little intro about parables talked about the fact that the parables call for decision. Call us to make decisions. And I, as I said, I find it most helpful to see that the weeds are growing in me.
I know.
As well as the wheat. And I can thank God for that. So, and that God's going to sort it out. Yes, Guy.
But it's a little bit difficult if you, from a Lutheran perspective, if you think that you're the one, your decision is what's going to make the difference.
Right. Right.
So God has made a decision for us as well. And that's what we've struggled with that a little bit in our group. We talked about the ending of this, both of these parables, and the fact that God is judging some and committing some to the fires of hell. How does that, I mean, how do we deal with that?
Could everyone hear what Scott was saying? Scott was saying that the parable does talk about committing the weeds to hell, the fires of hell. And also the fact that earlier, what was it? The point, the decision.
Yeah, I mean, if the
Aspect
decision
of
is
it.
ours, that's a problem. How do you not be weedy?
And
So God has made a decision on our behalf as well, too.
yeah.
And we hear that. That's the good news, that we are the good seed, but
Yeah.
A little bit of
And
bad.
I would think that the very context of the fact that we're talking, Matthew talks about the kingdom of heaven is now. And Jesus is in our midst, is talking about God's decision for us. And God's decision to become part of us. I think like Tony and
Well, I was looking at that third or the second point where it says, what can we understand about Emmanuel, God with us in this parable? In line with that, I'm thinking that God is showing patience in having both the wheat and the weed grow together. And so with regard to a decision, God is being patient as both grow together.
did you hear that? God is showing patience in allowing them both to grow together.
I guess I like what you said, is that the weeds are growing within us, and I kind of like to think of it that way. Maybe that's what he wants us to pull out, the evil within us, and rather than each. I mean, it's, I don't know if anyone's totally good or totally bad, or however you want to say it. So I like that, what you said.
How badly does it stretch Lutheran theology to consider ourselves as the field? And we are growing weeds and we're growing wheat. And at the end, God will burn away the weeds and leave us as he created us.
That's pretty good.
I think that's pretty good. Did you attend some?
I've fought against common theology all my life.
Yeah.
That's where I got that from.
Yeah, so,
There doesn't appear to be any room in this parable for anyone to be converted or forgiven. In the weeds.
I don't, that's because that's God's business. Like Scott was saying, it isn't the decision on our part that saves us. I don't.
that's an interesting point.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've been reading this book, Short Stories by Jesus. It's Town the Parables, and it's written by a Jewish professor who's at a Christian university in the South in the Bible Belt. She said, kind of interesting, but it's the people who endorse it are, good names. So I got it. I don't remember exactly where I saw it. It was in Sojourners or Century, Christian Century or where, but anyway, one thing she says is a warning of looking at the explanation that the gospel writer gives you, because that domesticates it and it makes you stop thinking about all the different interpretations that would lead you to meaning for you. And so, and like this one, like we said, in our time, we can look at it a different way than they look at it when they were under, I don't know, Roman Empire and all sorts of things, and they want vengeance, so, but just a, warning to always, and the same thing like with the lost coin and the lost sheep. Luke says that's about forgiveness. Forgiveness is never mentioned. How do you forgive a sheep or a coin? So, and that's what Luke made it to be. So you want to look beyond what they say.
one more point back here, and then I want to go to the next one.
I was just going to say that verse 43 for me, then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. I mean, that's where I put my hope. Yes, I'm funny weedy, but because of Jesus and his death and resurrection, I think, that is that we will shine like the sun in the kingdom of our Father.
Did everyone hear? Okay, great. Let's move on. He put before them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in his field. It is the smallest of all the seeds, but when it is grown, it is the greatest of shrubs and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and make nests in its branches. Scott, again, is responsible for this. Thank you, Scott. The mustard seeds and the growth of to about 3 meters high. The hyperbole is not very real. It's not the greatest of all trees. And yet that juxtaposition of the small and the great or the large might have some role for us. So let's discuss this parable in the same way as that first one. You're part of the future.
Where is my
I think.
I don't know if we have started this event unless.
Yeah, you can't make things out of Christology and whatnot. Right.
Yes, that's.
Yeah.
So when you look at our day. So that's like. You know, maybe this kind of.
Stuff.
Well, I think, you know, the whole idea of we're not responsible. And then it emerges as it maybe. So I like the idea when a seed. Then growth comes. Exactly. Yes.
One of those, I don't know.
One, I rolled it to the 60.
Yeah.
And so if it.
Oh. Yes, and that's what I said.
Planted and. Prayed for, now worried. You know, learned about. Even though. Don't spend your time on these. Getting back to my note.
All started out with.
And see.
There's something to be said about the family tree. I mean.
Yeah.
Children.
It's so much fun seeing your discussion going. It just, because really this is what parables are. And so I appreciate that. I'm sorry again to cut it short. One thought that I would like to add to the mix on this is a biblical, a New Testament teacher that I heard talk about mustard. And any farmers here? What do you think of mustard?
It's a weed.
It's a
It's a weed. It's a weed. And so the interesting thing about it is Jesus uses a weed here as a positive example potentially. And the other thing about mustard is you can't get rid of it. As a weed. This teacher that I heard said that for many of us, it might be more appropriate to say it's like a dandelion.
Yeah, I suppose here, yeah.
You just can't, you can dig it up, you can try to get rid of it, you can't get rid of it. And if the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, you can't get rid of it. God's persistence is going to keep that kingdom coming toward us. I think I saw two.
This writer was saying too that in the Roman world and then Jewish world, that part of the world, it was medicinal. It was used
Mustard.
medicinally and also wasn't cooking. So she was saying, and then with the birds coming, that talks about how again, the kingdom of God is about helping one another and giving shelter and nourishing and healing and all.
There was another hand I thought.
Mine is just a crazy comment. As a child, I would visit on the farm. I was a city girl that visited on the farm. And my uncle would pay me and another cousin that was there a penny for each mustard plant.
She said that as a city kid, she would go to the farm and visit her grandparents. And that she and a cousin were paid a penny for every mustard plant they pulled out.
Probably end up with a quarter or something like that.
So.
And it just occurred to me, this is also about pride. Because we're the mustard seed.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's also, very much about the reversal of the kingdom. The small has a place.
Right, and a noxious weed can even do it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's go to the other parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed in with 3 measures of flour until all of it was leavened. I tried to bake bread one time.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, kind of amazing. Yeast, I made. It's like,
Raise the bread.
You put these in. Yeah. Yep. Yes. Because you learn. You have to learn based on what you told you. You need warm water, not hot water, not water.
Well. You end up with something.
Yeah, usually. I'm done.
Yeah. Right. The small item.
Yes, it can. It was. Yes.
Okay, now what do you do with that?
Right.
But, you know, just. that's the one.
But it's quite simple. I don't think of that. What do we understand about well? And what
I mean, and I think this general as American.
We're winding down a little bit, so, I'll just comment on two things. One question that was raised by the group up here was, what about water and salt? Don't you need those for the bread? And so maybe that's a point that the parable can stir up in us. Okay, what's the water and the salt? What would the water and salt be and do within this?
Yeah, what we were talking about was that the parable seems to say that God is the yeast, but the yeast, it can't grow, it can't rise without the water. And so we have to be the water that works with God to help it grow.
There you go. There's.
Just the right temp.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun talking about God being the one that allows the punching down in life. The kneading, if you will, and how much we learn from that. And that's that patience. And without that frequent kneading, you wouldn't have nice fluffy bread.
Could everyone hear that? Okay. One thing that I think was maybe a little difficult, and I know I really had to work on this a little bit, was, okay, if in fact these parables are at the end of a section that talks about people rejecting, unsure, or welcoming to Jesus and the message of the kingdom of heaven, how do these connect with that? And I do think that for those who reject, I think the leaven and the mustard seed are reminders, be careful not to miss. Be careful not to miss what's there. For those who are unsure, sometimes God's kingdom is hidden, seems hidden. It's kind of blended in. And then for those who welcome, have hope. Things may not look apparent sometimes, but have hope that the kingdom of God is, or kingdom of heaven is at work. Any other thoughts or insights from this third parable?
Want me to share a little bit what this book said? And I think Scott mentioned that the 3 measures is not 3 cups of flour. It's this huge amount. Did you say?
No.
Okay. Anyway, she was saying that's like actually 20 or 30 pounds worth.
Is each measure that much?
No, I think
No,
total
total.
3 together. And there's a word in whatever the Hebrew word is. You find that same 3 measures worth, but it was considered an amount, a special amount, or a typical amount. So it's the Jewish mind would go back to Abraham and Sarah when the 3 visitors come, and Abraham tells Sarah, go make bread for them, and it's this huge amount of bread. And the same thing with Hannah when she brings Samuel back to the temple, she makes this huge amount of bread. And so it's really also talking about the abundance of God, that a little bit of yeast can go a long ways, and then all this abundance. So here's a householder who's made all this bread. What should she be doing with it?
Yeah,
Is a question of what are we doing in the kingdom of God? So.
I think within our context too, we can look at it as a starter.
Yep.
A starter, how people share their dough or their starter dough. I think that could be a really, really interesting thought of how kingdom is shared one to another.
Yeah, and she said it's actually sourdough, like we.
Yeah.
To the starter.
Yeah, the starter is how it will pass.
So, our time is about done, but I would like to thank Scott.
Yeah, one more time.
Terrible, and you get a couple minutes in our closing to just look at this.
Yeah, that was just bad.
And perhaps think of it in the same way that you thought of those other the other parable.
You will be preaching again.
Yeah.
And the children and the adult.
Open the But I don't know, I don't think that. Well, we're not gonna keep down.
I mean, the demand.
I feel better now. I feel more.
And I'm having.
Yeah, when it is on. But see, I have who is what you call water. It's just a natural thing. Her kids loved that time. Mine didn't. I mean, I do know what's going on.
Are they the same? There are two other parables in Matthew 13. There are more than that, but there are two others that I'd simply like to read as our closing and then dismiss because it's time for our the next service. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which someone found and hid. Then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls. On finding one pearl of great value, he went and sold all that he had and bought it. And the prayer would be that we can mine parables very deeply for the pearl, for the treasure, and for the growth that can happen with these stories of Jesus. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes. Anyway, so, but one of the things that. Interesting. Right, and. Especially. Wow.